is the review I've been working hard on. Believe it or not, you can see my face is even sunburned. Being out shooting with the GFX today for 4 hours. A little over 4 hours. This is not, however, a street camera. It does qualify with the 32 to 64, however. I think it's dual linear motors. I know that I can say for a fact that this big camera with the vertical grip and the 2-pound 32-64, someone who has no muscles like me can pack it around for 4 hours on the street, then absolutely anybody can pack it around the street. So let's this be a real review of the GFX, because I put my money where my mouth was. I'm not renting this thing or borrowing it. I actually own it. Not only that, but all 3 current lenses and the tilt shift adapter and the vertical grip. The only thing I actually don't like about this camera are the stupid Mamiya lugs. Now, the straps are quick detach, but the only way they're quick detach is if they are too easy to quick detach and you end up dropping your camera. So there's a little wedge behind the actual camera strap to lock them into place, and the only way to get that wedge out is actually to take the actual strap off, and then you have access to the wedge to pull it out, then you're able to remove it. So I have found a way around that. And I'll show you the mod on the GFX for making a hand strap for it, because I'm definitely the most DIY creative creature on YouTube when it comes to photography and light mods. Ooh, Lord, where do you start on the GFX? I almost bought a Mamiya Leaf a couple years ago, which currently its sale price is $20,000, but it's basically $25,000 of the cheapest lens of $5,000. You're talking about $30,000 entry fee. Now this camera with the 3 lenses and the tilt shift adapter and the vertical grip and 2 spare batteries, you're looking at right under $15,000. Same sensor as on the Mamiya, however improved design, far better made. Compare it to the 645 Pentax for $7,000 in the body. You know, actually I like Pentax a lot, but Pentax's 645Z, I mean, that thing's a piece of junk compared to this for $500 less, comparatively. So this is not my opinion. I can actually make an objective statement. If we leave out the $50,000 Phase 1, for Christ's sakes, which none of you are going to buy, neither am I. If we leave that out, Fujifilm, you know, just steamrolled everybody's ass with the GFX. And you think that's a subjective statement, but it's not. I shot medium format for a long time. That was film, 6.7 Pentax. Bronica, Hasselblad. I never owned the Hasselblads. I always borrowed them. I used to work at a camera store to get free use of Hasselblads. This is it. It is the GFX Fujifilm. Now, a lot of people are going to think, now obviously this camera is not for everybody. I would never tell anybody to sell anything to get this camera. I myself sold some extra copies of some extra cameras to get it and saved up for 6 months to get it. But this is 20% easier to learn than the functions are on the X-T2. I mean, medium format has always been a very simple, uncomplicated camera, but that's something you need to state to people. Where's the complexity on this camera? We know it's at least, and that's my estimate, about 20% easier to use than the Fujifilm X-T2 is, and its menu system. The menu system, by the way, is about 95% the same. So if you're familiar with the X Pro 2 or X-T2, you'll be very familiar with this. The issue is that given the enormously sharp files on this, and they're not sharp, they're actually ultra sharp. You have no forgivability. I mean, the camera will crucify your images if you are not, you know, methodical and focused in like a laser to capture the images. Now there's ways around that with the electronic shutter. Also, the next way would be the electronic front curtain shutter, which is an option that has a mechanical rear shutter and electronic front curtain, which you do not have those options on X-T2 or X Pro 2 if you're not familiar with that. It is literally half electronic and half mechanical shutter. So you do have a much larger picture window on that sensor that obviously has to scan the image, where the actual mechanical shutters have to cover that huge ass sensor. And so that, combined with the fact that the files are, by their very nature, if done correctly, insanely sharp, your forgivability compared to your X-T2, and this is the professional part of this camera where you need to know what the hell you're doing. The forgivability, like compared to an X Pro 2 or X-T2, You know, from that to this camera is like about here. So you need to know what you're doing. This is a camera that begs for a tripod, but that is not meant to be said that you can't go walking around with it. This is not really a walking around camera. However, you know, I did that for 4 hours a day, and the other day, and the day before that, on Sunday, wasn't it? Anyway, that's not important. The one thing that needs to be mentioned, and it's $560, not the viewfinder, which comes with the camera, but the tilt-shift adapter. They actually should charge more for the camera and actually call it a necessary accessory. Let me take it off here. This is the tilt-shift adapter. It'll actually go full vertical. Actually, I use it right like this, which reminds me of using a twin lens reflex, or 45 degrees off one side, one way or the other. This is an absolutely just period, no damn argument, necessary accessory for the GFX. Even if you not a vertical battery grip nut like I am, which I am, the tilt-shift adapter is, oh my god, necessary. Just the thought of not even having this tilt-shift adapter makes me cringe. Even without testing it, I knew that I would desperately want that. I grew up on twin lens Yashica, like the Yashica 124 Matte Gs. Even if you didn't go up on twin lens reflex or like a Hasselblad pop-up where you'd actually look down the case, it's so much more comfortable, especially for the studio. You would absolutely fall in love with it. You really do want the tilt-shift adapter if you're going to get the GFX. I know it obviously costs another $560. The touchscreen, unlike the XT20, is silky smooth and perfectly responsive. Some touchscreens are herky-jerky. It's like, you know, you got to do it 3 times before it. Oh, that's what you want, and that's not the issue. I thought that the touchscreen would be, you know, the same sort of firmware, the same sort of responsiveness as is found on the XT20, but it's not, thankfully. Not that the XT20 is bad at all. Yeah, most people would assume that since this is a professional medium format camera, which is meant for a hardcore commercial product, corporate photography, high-end fashion, and some contrived wedding portraitures, that well, this would be harder to use. And other than obviously the insanely sharp images where the forgiveness is extremely narrow, this camera is no more burdensome to use outside of that particular criteria than is your XT2, and is 20% easier to learn and use. Most people don't know that, but medium format, unlike a full frame or crop sensor, is not a button sniffing camera. I mean, it is meant most of the time to be used in manual mode, or at the very most, you know, aperture priority. Of course, it does have program mode, obviously. Not that it would, of course, be tantamount to a sin to use this camera in program mode, but that is an option. One thing that people want to know, and I said I would not talk about speed on this camera, and I'm really not, but I'll make a quick mention because people want to know that. This is a 63mm. I don't recommend the 63mm. Obviously, it does have better image rendition than the 32 to 64. The 32 to 64 is absolutely exquisite and divine. If you only have one lens for your GFX, it is definitely the 32 to 64. This camera does require sensor saturation. While you can obviously clean up a lot even at ISO 3200 or ISO 6400, 3200 is absolutely pushing it to the max. And I found that other people found the exact same consensus on the GFX also. Exposure noise above ISO 1600 is, quote, excessive. Not like detrimentally excessive, but this camera nor any other medium format camera is meant for high ISO use. It's just not. This camera demands sensor saturation or good SNR, signal to noise ratio, and that's what the hell it is meant for. It's not designed for such work. You know, if you're looking for high ISO performance, and you need to get yourself a damn Nikon, you know, D500, which can shoot things that you can't even see in near total darkness. This camera is not a high ISO performer. While, and this is a bold statement, and I make this statement very deliberately, but it's nothing to bitch about this camera. It's the same thing with autofocus. It's like if I were to bitch about this camera's autofocus speed. Well, it's medium format. It's a medium format camera, for Christ's sakes. This camera is not a triathlete, which would be like a really fast sports action full frame camera. It is a sumo wrestler. In other words, wherever you point it at is going to just mow it down and mow it down good. It will produce images that will just make your jaw drop. It is not in any way, shape, or form speedy. Likewise still, even though this camera is like, oh, well, right there is ISO 6400 and 12,000, you know, might as well just cross those off. If you're going to buy a GFX camera and have some sort of delusion in your brain, it's like, well, I know you could do a bunch of Lightroom recovery and noise reduction. Obviously, you can do that. But no, you should not suffer the delusion of using this camera at ISO 3200 and above. Just forget about it. This camera is not made for that. It's made for deliberate, purposeful work where you are in control of the lighting. And if you're not in control of the lighting and you want to use the GFX, you need to realize that 3200 is already, whoa baby, that's a little too much noise. But all digital medium format is like this, so there's nothing to impugn against Fuji. Medium format is not made for speed, and it ain't made for high ISO performance. I state that boldly and accurately. It's not my opinion, belief, or conviction. It's just a damn fact on this camera. But it is not a negative against this camera. You know? You're not going to, argue about squeezing cow tits and complain about not getting orange juice. You know? When you're squeezing the cow tits of medium format, you don't complain about high ISO performance, i.e. lack thereof, and you don't bitch about autofocus speed. Because that's not what this camera's made for. So I really needed to accentuate that, shall we say. Something else people have complained about, and it's not a complaint at all, people that know how the hell to use studio strobes and know what a T1 time is. 125th second sync speed is not an issue. In studio, your shutter speed is actually your T1 time, or your flash time. Let's say I'm doing like 1/8 power on the monoblock strobe behind me. I think the T1 time, or 90% of the flash burst, is 1/13,000th of a second. So no matter what your shutter speed is set out on this camera, the true shutter speed is the T1 time of your studio strobe. Also, too, you can do HSS with this. I mean, doing walking around and all sorts of stuff at HSS up to 1/4000th of a second on the GFX. However, not with monoblocks yet. However, I know those options are coming out. What's incredible is the sub-menu up here. It is completely customizable. It can be reprogrammed to show any one of a myriad of displays to suit your needs. Absolutely love that to death. It definitely outclasses the Hasselblad X1D and the Mamiya Leaf, not only in value, but build quality. This is it for digital medium format. This is the reason Fujifilm made this camera. They looked around. This is also the reason people say, why didn't Fujifilm make an FX camera? Because the market is saturated. Why fight a war you can't win? You just take it up to the next level and you immediately dominate everybody's butts instantly. It's like, what's the competition for this camera? A horribly overpriced Mamiya Leaf and a subpar Pentax 645. Well, this camera instantly blew the hell out of both of them instantly. Blew the hell out of the Hasselblad X1D. Far cheaper, far better build quality. The build quality on this beats the Hassie. Yes, even the Hassie. Unquestionably it does. It beats the Pentax 645. I know that for a darn fact. And it absolutely beats the Mamiya Leaf. And is a lot cheaper than all of them. A lot cheaper. One thing you'll never have to do with this camera is if you hit the images right, in other words, nail the autofocus, that you'll never have to apply sharpening slider in Lightroom with this camera. The flat top on this, once you remove this tilt shift adapter, is absolutely perfect for studio use. You can pop on a pocket wizard or any one of a number of wireless triggers and actually drop your autofocus point on the rear of your touch screen and just do all your shooting from there. You do not need to use your viewfinder. This is the viewfinder, by the way. It does come with the camera. Doesn't come with the vertical grip, which was another, $600, or the tilt shift adapter, which was $560. Micro contrast and the given correct gain, or SNR, on this sensor. The images are absolutely unmatched from anything I've seen, and that's not including the Phase 1. The Phase 1 is not in the same class. I don't know if you know how much Phase 1 costs. Yeah, or how huge the files are. So, leaving out the Phase 1, The files on this are unmatched from anything that I've seen, and I have seen the images from the other medium format digital cameras, including the 645 Pentax, which I have used, the Mamiya Leaf, which I almost bought 2 years ago, and the Hasselblad X1D. Battery life is great. Like today, for example, I have 2 batteries in this, obviously vertical grip and camera. After 4 hours of shooting, I was only down to about 68% on the vertical grip battery after the 4 hours of shooting. As I said, the menu system is basically 95% the same as the XT2, but it is about 20% less complicated as far as all the overlays and overlaps of, you can do this if you hit this button, and I'm very familiar with the XT2, and this is simpler, but medium format's always been simpler. The superfine images out of this, I would only ever shoot superfine plus RAW. The superfine images average 30 megabytes. The compressed RAW files, the lossless compressed RAW files, they are lossless, average about 65 megabytes. The uncompressed RAW files average about 145 megabytes. I contacted Fujifilm because I bought a charger for this camera, which does not come with a camera, and there's some information. I made a video last week about this camera. I said this camera made me cry, and I asked one of the tech support guys that I won't name. I said, "Hey, this is Ken," and the first thing he said to me, he says, he's in Jersey. He says, "Hey, you still crying over that camera?" Because I said this camera made me cry. So I was like, "Oh, you guys are watching my video." I was like, "Yeah." I can't do a New Jersey accent. I probably just butchered the New Jersey accent. Heaven forbid. I'm so used to shooting twin lens reflex and actually shooting on my 6.7 Pentax. We also had a pop-up viewfinder that actually looked down on the focusing screen. This is absolutely so divine. I mean, if anybody else actually ever used this, the first thing they do is buy this. Actually, AF plus MF2 for focus peaking override, because like I said, if you don't nail the focus on this perfectly, it's really magnified. The sensor is 1.7 times bigger than an FX sensor. What people think is, well, that means it's 170% better as far as dynamic range. And obviously it needs to be enlarged less, but that's not the case. It's not additively better, it is a multiplicative better. This is the case where, like the Roman fascia, like 1 and 1 and 1 don't equal 4. When you actually take things and bring them together, you have a factor that's multiplicative. As far as the micro contrast, the color saturation, the pop on the images on this are absolutely just, jaw-dropping. They are mind-blowing. This camera will still make you cry. I mean, wow. And I'm not in love with, by the way, the viewfinder is made in China, the tilt shift adapter is made in China, and so is the vertical grip, but the lenses and the actual body itself are made in Japan. This camera is so well built. I was actually impressed. I knew the 63 would be slow. I only had the chance to demo it when the Fuji rep came by. And the 63 is still fairly slow. The 32 to 64 is significantly faster, and the 120 f4 macro, which I also have, is a huge honking beast. I would not even dare consider that for packing around, at least not much. At least not packing it around and shooting with it, unless it was a contrived shot where you actually went to a location, whipped it out, used it, and put it back in your bag. This camera is incredible. I can say, and not making a subjective statement, that this is, period, flat out, no ifs, ands, or buts, the digital medium format camera. Not like, well, it's a good one, No, it is the damn medium format digital camera, period. It does not compare to the Pentax, or I should say the Pentax does not compare to it, the 645Z. Likewise, still the Mamiya Leaf, no bloody way. Which I almost bought one a couple years ago. Not only is the construction on it, price being irrelevant, this has the best construction. Price being irrelevant, the image output on this is better than that. Well, those use the same sensor. Well, a camera's not a sensor. It's an image processor. Also, too, while this is the same sensor in those two cameras, This uses a proprietary micro lens design designed by Fuji. That's actually really important when it comes to the SNR, the gain, or the rendering of the image before it even hits the sensor so far at directing the light, not to mention, you know, the converters and the SNR firmware and how the image is ultimately processed and dropped onto the SD cards. I'm not going to go over the specifications of this camera because you can read that garbage anywhere, including on Fujifilm's website. You know, to do a review, nobody gives a damn about the specifications. You know, go read that on Fujifilm's website. So, objectively, this is the best and the only, period, medium format camera. I've been beating around the gills now for over a week, very, very consistent. I've gone over the owner's manual with it in my hand like 4 times. It only really took 2 times. I want to make sure I can fast scan things really fast. Been over every feature, every possibility of use in this camera. Like I said, it is easier to use than the XT20. However, like I said, whether it's electronic shutter, mechanical shutter, or electronic front curtain shutter, if you have any shake, or if your focus is a wee bit off, because it's like, well, you know, these GFX lenses aren't that fast, most of them are f4, you know, they're medium format lenses, you don't realize an f4 is not an f4 is not an. If you're a little bit off on your focus, or you have a little bit of shake, the camera will spank you. It will spank you on the bottom, and it won't make your images look too happy. So you will have to be very vigilant, like a hawk, when taking images with this. It's not that bad, but it is something that it will spank you. And like I said, this is a sumo wrestler for images. It is purposeful. You point it in one direction, and it will mow it down, and it will obliterate it in a good way. Secondly, this sensor and this camera require saturation, good SNR. You know, even though it says 12,800 over here on the ISO dial, you can forget about that and 6,400, and basically almost forget about 3,200. And I found like 4 other people that have this camera that agree with me and made basically the same statement I just made about ISO on this camera. But that's not a negative. That's not something to complain about on this camera. Nor is the sync speed, because people that know what the hell they're doing, they know that the real shutter speed in the studio is your T1 time, not the actual shutter speed. I could stick this thing on bulb, and if my studio is totally dark, and if I hit the hit the shutter release button, bam. You know, let's say 1 second, and I let my finger off. You know, my flash pulse is 1/13. That was my real effective shutter speed, is the T1 time out of my studio strobes, 13,000th of a second, even though I had the shutter open technically for 1 second, assuming my studio is totally dark, or basically dark. People don't realize that, you know. Shutter speed is important until you start talking about flash and Pro Studio strobe work, and then things change. If people learned how to use light meters, they would realize that a lot sooner. But most people don't use light meters. So anyway, that's my review of the GFX. It is thorough. I put my money where my mouth is. I'm not borrowing this thing. I'm not renting this thing. It is mine. And not only am I proud of having owning it. I said owned it. I'll show you the receipts. You're going to see it perpetually in future videos. It's not going anywhere. Not only am I proud on owning it, I'm even more proud than I thought I would be. Much more so. Very impressive. I do not impress easily, girlfriend, and I am impressed. Thank you for watching this video. If you like this video, you can drop me a buck or two. This camera cost me a fortune. I did this video review diligently over many days to make sure I give accurate, reliable information about the GFX. I own every current lens available for it, including the tilt-shift adapter and the vertical grip. If you're going to get this camera, buy the tilt-shift adapter, period. Don't even think about it. It's like, well, that's more money. Buy it. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you later. Loxi veritas, do svidania, uvidimся, aloha, paka, hasta luego, and all that other language. Adios, goodbye stuff. Bye. Bum, ba-dum, bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, 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 bum.